Welcome to Better Mental Health, a podcast for men looking to build a resource and community around destigmatizing mental health. I'm Blair.
I'm Jamie.
And I'm Blake. And in this episode, we discuss the book No More Mr. Nice Guy by Robert Glover. So Glover is a therapist and self-described nice guy who also began to see a pattern of behavior in his male clients that reflected his own, and he called it the nice guy syndrome. So we each read this book over our short break and decided to pull out some relevant stories and anecdotes that fit our own experiences.
So what is the nice guy syndrome? Robert Glover describes the nice guy syndrome as a belief that if nice guys are good, they'll be loved, get their needs met, and live a problem-free life. So do you guys have like your own definition of that as it pertains to your own life, either of you guys?
For me, the nice guy syndrome, I can definitely relate to. And part of it is, this anti-conflict, anti-confrontational type of personality where if you just present this always nice image to the world, then you will find that, magically there won't be any conflict and everything will be just hunky-dory all the time, because I think at the heart of it, most nice guys want to avoid conflict at all costs. They want like inner peace in a sense, and by being nice to everyone, sometimes overly nice, they think that will allow them that inner peace that they're looking for.
Yeah.
Yep.
Blair, how about you?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good synopsis. There were so many different things that reading this book, I was like, oh man, that is so something that I've done. And I don't know if listeners know a lot about the Enneagram system too, but like we are all nines, which is the peacemaker, peacemakers. So I think that like that's kind of part of our system as it is anyways. But yeah, it's the belief that like, oh, if I'm just nice, things will just go my way. And there's a lot to get into in this book, but I felt pretty called out on a lot of different occasions. Which I think because we were introduced to this book a long time ago. I think it was post college, but it was a long time ago still, maybe 10 years ago. And I remember starting to read it, and there was a part in the book where it's like, if you start reading this book, your life will change, your relationships will shift. And I was in a relationship that I knew was kind of like, I don't know, not rocky, but I was like, oh, it's had conflict before. So I think there was a part of me that like was scared when I was reading it. Because I knew things would shift and change. But yeah, so I didn't finish it then, and truth be told, just barely finished it this morning. So yeah,
I think the thing he says in the book is your relationship will either start to thrive and like you'll have a better connection than you've ever had before, or your relationship will take a quick end if you start actually doing all the things that I'm talking about in the book. I get that feeling of like, oh shit, like if I actually follow this, if follow through and start doing this stuff, then but I think the other thing I want to add to sort of the definition of the nice guy, at least as it pertains to me, he talks a lot about how being raised by your mother at a point in time in your life when you should be starting to be sort of like more connected with your father, if you end up sort of continuing to try and please your mother and that stays your focus, that you tend to fall into this trap of like always needing to sort of please your mother and having that be a focus in your future romantic relationships until you start to do this process and disconnect from that need to please in order to feel love. So it's what Blake was talking about, giving in order to sort of get. So that's, I think it takes a lot of work, and it's something, I experienced in my relationship is giving in order to get, and not realizing that that's what I was doing for a long time.
I think he puts a lot of emphasis on that relationship with both parents, right?
Yeah.
He talks about a lot of the relationship with, for a nice guy, relationship with their mother, may have been the beginnings of what created the nice guy syndrome in them, whether it was you were constantly trying to please your mother, or maybe your father was absent and you kind of filled that void and developed this, what was a normal relationship, but as you get older, when you're supposed to be more distancing yourself from your mother. In many cases, maybe that doesn't happen, and there's an attachment that maintains longer than it should. As well as on the relationship with the father, who would show, the son how to, I guess, more integrate with other men and start to face some of these, I think he calls them challenges of men that
Right.
that he puts a lot of importance on.
Yeah.
But yeah, it does lead into the covert contracts as well that you were talking about, which was a key takeaway from me, where I really felt called out. So this idea of covert contracts, he gives the example of, if you're in a relationship, you might say to your partner, "I love you," expecting to hear "I love you too" in return. It's a very basic example of a covert contract, but it's sort of manipulative in that you're hoping to hear the words "I love you." So by saying "I love you" to that person, then you're getting what you want. Now this can branch out into, lots of other areas in your life where you maybe become a nice guy because you think that by doing favors, going out of your way, constantly like sacrificing, that others will see, "Oh wow, you're doing so much for me, then I will do whatever it is that you need." The problem
Right.
is that most nice guys never actually communicate what it is that they want. They just expect people to read their minds, and by doing these nice things, they'll say, "Oh, okay, I'm going to return the favor in some way."
Right. I
Yeah.
there was a line from the covert contracts part of the book that really stood out to me. It was he said a few things before, but then the sentence ended with, "The primary paradigm of the nice guy syndrome is nothing more than a big covert contract with life." And I was like, "Ooh, yeah, that's kind of how it feels.
Yeah.
I've lived in my life before, where I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm just gonna keep doing things for others, and that'll bring me good things from others that I'm helping." And it has
Yeah.
definitely led to a lot of disappointment in my life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think realizing that a big unlock for me when I read the book the first time was realizing that I was a needy person, and I would act like and actually thought that I didn't have needs. Lauren and I would have this conversation all the time. We would talk about love languages in this example, and I'd be like, "I don't know what my love languages are. I feel like I don't have them. I feel content all the time. I'm just easy to please, Jamie. And you're the one who has all these needs." And so I was resenting Lauren for needing so much. And then I would have these huge blow ups and get angry about different things in our relationship and not realize where that was coming from. And what it really was stemming from is I had a huge amount of needs around words of affirmation. And I wasn't getting that from Lauren. And she was actually like saying negative things about me or talking about me in a negative light because she wasn't getting her needs met either.
Right.
And so it was like the big aha moment for me was like, "Oh shit, like I have needs and I need Lauren to meet those needs. I need to communicate that and figure out how to do that in a way that's healthy." It took a long time to figure that out, and it's still, obviously a work in progress, but it's much,
For
much
sure.
better now.
Yeah, something I noted in my notes when I was reading. I wanted to ask you guys, like, when was the first time you realized you had needs? Because for me, it was not that long ago.
Oh, really?
Yeah, no,
What's
and I don't know
your
if
example?
my example, the one that came to mind was non-monogamy. That was another part of the things that I wanted to touch on too. Like non-monogamy, I feel like forces you again to address the needs that you have, because you're like, this is the space that I have. This is the partners that I can give my time and energy to. But the most stark example that's coming to mind is I was canceling or on a date that I had planned, and I was feeling terrible. And they were like, "Just tell me what you need," and I was like, "I don't need anything." And they're like, "Well, do you need a night alone?" And I was like, "Yes."
Yeah.
And I was
Wow.
like, "Oh, okay, yeah, I have a need." And then they're like, "Yeah, you have to, like, in order to, what's the analogy, like, you have to fill your own cup in order
Yeah.
to, like, give others or fill
Put
others'
your own
cups."
life mask on
Right.
first before you put on
Yeah,
the mask for other
but
people.
the thought that came to mind, I think I had expressed it to that partner at the time, but I was like, "Oh, I have a cup." Like, like I didn't even realize I had a cup that I needed to fill. Like, so
Wow.
it was kind of stark in my mind that
Yeah.
came to mind. But Blake, I'm curious about your your moment of realization, if any of them stick out.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, the ironic part too is that in so many cases, I think a lot of times people are happy to like give you what you want, like, or like help you with your needs if you've clearly communicated them. But to both your guys' point, there's kind of two steps. A is actually recognizing that you have needs, and then B, clearly communicating what those are and like how like your partner or your family member, whoever, can actually help you with that. Because in many cases they might be happy to do it. If not, that's another discussion to have. And
Totally.
that's why part of the book says your relationship might start to flourish or it might take a quick turn the other way, is because once you start recognizing your needs and communicating them, if your partner is saying, no, I'm not going to do that, well, that's, he gives some examples from the book of some of his clients who, either ended relationships or got divorced because that conversation started to go that way.
Mm-hmm.
An example for me, and I guess this ties back to the relationship with, parents as well. So for me, I need alone time as well. And like, for me, a lot of times when I need my alone time, the thing I like to do is play video games. And growing up, I had a lot of restrictions on playing video games as a kid. Like there's limited times that I was allowed to do this. And even when I was playing during like my allowed time windows, I would feel a lot of like guilt from like my mom, like, who I don't think really liked video games. She didn't like understand them, thought it was like I was just rotting in front of the TV.
Right.
And so if she would like come downstairs while I was playing, I would have this like sort of like guilt, like, I shouldn't be doing this.
Oh, wow.
And I still feel that today. Even though my wife is very, very much understanding to my video game need, I still find myself having that like guilt feeling of like, I shouldn't be doing this. And she'll be like, do whatever you want. Like, like, and it's so funny because like she's like, I know that you enjoy that and you should do that when you want to, but I still kind of have that inner guilt that I'm fighting.
Yeah,
for sure.
But that was it did take, that was something I realized, not too long ago. I was like, this is something I knew I enjoyed doing, but I didn't realize it was an actual need of like having that alone time to myself to do something that I really enjoy.
Yeah.
I'd always kind of tied it to a guilt factor. And so now I'm realizing like I don't need to have that guilt tied to it.
Yeah. There's no shame in needing to take some alone time, play a game, unwind, have some fun.
Yeah.
I think what you're talking about too is it's interesting how much we hold on to from our childhood that we don't realize we're holding on to, and like how hard this work is to like undo the like guilt and shame that we experience from our childhood. And so I'm also curious like what it would take for you to feel free from the guilt or shame from in that experience. Like if you were to go play video games and just be like, like fully relax into it and like have fun with it without that.
I definitely have those moments now. Like with my wife, I mean, like I said, she's super understanding about like that need of mine. And so there'll just be days like yesterday afternoon, it was kind of a, lazy day. And she was like, kind of just don't feel like doing anything today. And I was like, yeah, I think I'm going to play video games for a while. She's like, cool. And it was just like, all right, yeah, I just get to relax and do that for a couple hours. And it was great. And so there are those moments, but then I feel like if I spring it on her unexpectedly, like, oh, I want to go play video games right now, even though I know she'll be totally cool with it, that's when I have that like inner guilt, when it's like, I feel like I'm springing it, out of nowhere. But I think I've gotten pretty far past that at this point. It's still in there a little bit. But an interesting part of this, I'm curious to get your guys' thoughts too, is like, I love my parents. I think they did like a great job raising us. And that was something he talks about in the book too, is like a lot of nice guys talk about like, oh, my parents were great, or I had like a really pretty good life or good childhood. And yet they still are holding on to these things. Yeah. And so it's not like I think that my parents were doing something wrong by like restricting my access to them. It was probably like, oh, these video games seem like they're a waste of time, or like, is my kid just rotting his brain because he's sitting in front of the TV all the time?
Yeah.
So they were trying to make the right parenting choice, not knowing that it would leave, some kind of impact on me in the long term.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, do you guys have any similar stories to that, where maybe your parents were trying to do something they thought was right, but you still are kind of carrying with you?
Like the thing that's coming to mind is a conversation I remember having with my mom about sex.
Oh.
And we were Christian scientists, so trying to figure out like, all right, so what is like the founder of Christian Science, this woman named Mary Beccaretti, like what does she believe? I remember asking my mom that, and my mom just wanting to express like how she believed things worked was that sex was for procreation only. And I remember that sticking in my head for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
So anytime I was doing it just because I wanted to please my partner or myself, there was an inner sense of like badness that I've definitely has taken a long time to overcome. Not saying that I have to any degree necessarily, but I think that's the one that's coming to mind for sure.
I have a similar story actually. I remember asking my mom. I had already like known what masturbation was at this point, but like I was kind of like, I remember being like old enough to test my mom and just be like, because someone brought it up on TV, it's like making a joke about masturbation or something like that, and I was just like, I don't know why, like what prompted this, but I was just decided to ask my mom, "Hey mom, what's masturbation?" Her response was, "That's something that old gross men do." That was it, and it was just like, huh. Yeah, and it just like sort of, it did that same thing where it's like, this is something I'm doing on a daily basis at that point, and will continue to do for a very long time,
Little
for
did
the
you
rest
know
of my life.
you were an old gross man
Yeah,
at that time.
yeah.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
don't know why I'm focusing on the old part of that. Like, why was that even
Yeah.
included in her definition?
Yeah. I don't know. I think it was just like an attempt at like, she was trying to figure out what to say and didn't know what to say. But something I'll do a little differently as a parent is to explain that very, very differently and talk about it in a much more loving, natural. It's something that all men do pretty much in order to relieve themselves, or I don't know what. Yeah, what's a healthy way of describing it? But
you got a little bit of time to figure it out.
Yeah, definitely.
I don't see Avit asking that question anytime soon.
I wanted to, well, Blair, I'll jump back to you.
Sure.
What do you think was like the key concept or like biggest takeaway from you reading it? I know you said you had a few moments where you felt called out. Was there one like big one?
I think the thing that it took me a long time to figure out for myself was like the needs part, which I alluded to earlier, but also within that, it was like, all right, focusing on yourself and your own needs is not like a detractor for people in your life. Like people seeing you put your needs first and speaking to that. I think I had a quote from it. He said, "Putting the self first doesn't drive people away; it attracts them." And I think I started noticing that, especially in non-monogamy. I noticed that I felt more attractive to them, and people were drawn to that. A lot of the times where it was, saying I don't have the energy to host a date this evening, like I need to spend time alone, like there was such a huge reservation that I would always notice in myself with that, because I was like, oh, because I'm canceling on them, they're not going to like it. But almost every time I was so surprised by the answer. I was like, okay, do your thing, and then we'll find a time that works better, and we'll where we're both feeling in a place that we have the space and energy to see each other. I was like,
so in hindsight, Blair, you mentioned that person actually kind of recognized your needs and said, "Hey, do you just need a night alone?" Would you have recognized that was a need for you without somebody? Because not everybody has somebody who will call it out for you and say, "Oh, it seems like you need," and that's kind of the whole, one of the whole points is discovering those needs. Do you have any insight, do you think, now, like for somebody who doesn't recognize that they have needs? Because I think that's the challenge, right? We all have needs. We just have to figure out what they are.
Yeah. I think just even having discussions with other men would have been super helpful. And that was something that Glover had mentioned in the book as well, was like nice guys often don't relate to other men very well. But I think if someone is able to relate to other men and have discussions about these types of things, like what are your needs, I think that's a great way to start discovering it. Yeah, because not everybody's going to have someone who's done the work and who's like, okay, I'm noticing in you that you
Yep.
might need, you have this need that I'm going to identify for you. Like that is pretty unrealistic, honestly. I think that's, yeah, and we can talk about that too. Like I have always been drawn towards relationships with women, friendships, as well as relationships. And I'm curious if you all have felt that same way.
Yeah. I think I feel safer, obviously safe. I don't know if that's obvious, but I feel safer with women over men. And I think that's a result of, like emotional honesty and availability of women. And I feel like also probably because of that same thing of like being raised by my mother more than my father, and feeling the safety and comfort from her, and realizing that like there's a safety and comfort with women. So but yeah, I'd like to have more male friendships, and I'd like to feel safer in male friendships. And like reading this book, I think that was one of the biggest takeaways for me in my current situation, is like to develop more male friendships where I can have honest, helpful, deeper conversations outside of like just us. And
Yeah.
So yeah. What about you, Blake?
Yeah, I think women are probably just raised a little bit more emotionally intelligent, and for guys who want to go to maybe those levels of a relationship. In high school, I had like a small group of friends, but it was very surface level. I mean, it was, we'd be playing video games or frisbee or hacky sack, or just there's always some activity, and that was how we kind of bonded. And then when I started to like build some friendships with women a little bit, I realized, oh, I can have like a conversation, and it just felt more natural and like easier. So part of it is the challenge. I think I agree. I wish I had more male friendships where it was, you could kind of go to those deeper levels. I think part of it is just a lot of guys were not really raised to be able to do that. Have a hard time going there and feel, and we talked about this, I think, on our last episode, just that uncomfortability that most men feel, double clicking and going deeper, going deeper into the conversation. Women, I found, were a little bit more natural at doing that, and so it was easier to have those types of conversations.
On page, I think it was 22 of this book, Nice Guy, No More Mr. Nice Guy, the author, he gave characteristics of nice guys, and the one that stood out to me was nice guys repress their feelings. Nice guys tend to analyze rather than feel. They see feelings as a waste of time and energy. I actually, as I was reading that, I was sitting next to my partner, and I read that out loud, and she was like, "You said those exact words." Like when we've had really
called out.
We've had really, yeah, no, it definitely was. When we sat down and had conversations about, she was trying to get me to talk about what I'm feeling, and I try to, but I can feel myself trying to analyze those and like think about a logical way to describe what I'm feeling versus just describing it. Have said those words like, what is the point of feeling? Like if I just felt things all the time, I would be like miserable all day long. I've had these discussions with at least one of my brothers as well. So I'm curious if you guys have relate to that at all. Like if feelings have felt like a waste of time and energy to you.
Not so much for me. I think that part of the reason they don't is because of my group therapy experience. Like I think that I've had enough experience in that group therapy. The group therapy is focused on emotional release. Like it's an emotional release process that is sort of like what's taught in the group therapy. And so what I've learned from that is that the more I'm able to release the emotion, the less that emotion actually controls me. So it's like, I think the more you're sort of pushing down and suppressing that emotion, the more it's actually controlling your actions. Whereas if you give it the space to sort of live, exist, and process out of you, the more you're free from that. And it becomes a much faster process to be able to kind of say like, oh, I feel this thing, let it happen, and then it's out. Example of that was I had a job interview. Fear has been a huge like emotional problem for me. Like I'm a very fearful person, and I try to suppress it and suppress it. And I had a job interview, and I started feeling very nervous. And so before the interview, I was just like sitting there nervous. And a big part of nervousness is like letting yourself shake, letting yourself like sort of like freak out and have a little bit of like a little bit of a panic attack kind of vibe. But it was like I needed to have sort of this like fearful shake, and I got it out and like let myself experience that. And then I went into the interview way more comfortable, way more ready for it, because I had let that fear happen before having it in the interview, you know?
Yeah. That's super
So it was
fascinating.
cool. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's still been a big struggle for me, I think. I think I still like always want to like live up to this image that I've portrayed for my whole life, which is like that I'm very even keeled and like I never have any major ups and downs emotionally. And I'm sure part of it is just inherent to, you know, my nature, I guess, but also I've definitely learned to just suppress a lot of that. So sometimes it's just not even recognizing how I'm feeling. So not even getting to the point where it's like, oh, I'm feeling this, and I probably would feel the same as you, Blair, like, oh, this is a waste of time. But like not even getting to that point where I even know what I'm feeling sometimes. And I can have a really, really hard time articulating what it is I'm feeling. And only if I've taken lots of time to process can I kind of get to a point of recognition. So that's something I am definitely still working on myself.
Yeah. For sure. I'm my brain went to like, as soon as you brought up fear, Jamie, that was like towards the latter part of the book. I don't know if we got to that part, but he was talking about how much fear prevents nice guys from getting the life that they want. And that was another part of the book. I was like, damn it. It was in therapy or in something, but I remember having said something to the effect of like, fear has run my life. Like this isn't something that I feel as much anymore. The last few years living the life that I'm living, but definitely fear has prevented me from kind of pursuing the things that are the things that I actually want.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because that part of it triggered you know, something in me too. And he talks about like a lot of his clients, these like nice guy clients, they're all like moderately successful. None of them are like above and beyond successful. They're all do like just enough to be kind of average. And that's something I think about a lot for myself. Like I just feel so, you know, middle of the road at like everything, everything that I do. And I think a lot of it is just that fear of taking a risk, taking a bet on myself to do something more. Also, shying away from attention, I think, is a big part of that. Like wanting to do enough to not, and this comes from like the whole like mediating and not wanting to rock the boat. Like doing enough so that I'm not a problem, but not doing so much that I'm getting too much recognition.
Yeah.
Part of the fear was not only like, fear of things going wrong, but fear of things like ending up the way you want it. Was that what you were going to say, Jamie?
No, that's totally right. And part of that, like I'm thinking about too, this like, you know, Blake's doing this podcast with us, and Blake's also got this other podcast going called Bald Man Cave, where, you know, you're destigmatizing sort of like the balding journey and talking about that. So I think that seeing you do that, I feel it sort of feels like an active version of going against that a little bit. Like you're putting yourself out there more. You're putting yourself in a position where if things start to go right, you know, and take off, is that more vulnerable for you, or are you like feeling like that's actually safe and okay?
Definitely. And I think I'm still fighting, even though I have been, I mean, I am proud of myself for like taking those steps to like put myself out there in more different facets and things like that. But at the same time, I still feel myself like self-sabotaging a little bit. Like I get one negative comment and I'm like, well, maybe I should just give this up. You know, like maybe I'm not the right person to be like sharing this message, is a thought that I have a lot. I think that's that part of me that's saying like, don't take this too far. Because then, you know, if it does get to that point, then what will happen with all that attention that's, spotlight on you, and that'll be too
Mm-hmm.
much. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think you're doing an awesome job. I think to give you a little bit of confidence, I think that you doing the Bald Man Cave helped spark the confidence for Blair and I to be able to do this podcast. So
100%.
I think whether
Cool.
you're knowing you're having an impact or not, like you're definitely having an impact on, small number of people or large number of people. And you never know who you're going to impact with just like a simple conversation or something.
Yeah.
Putting yourself out there. So it's cool.
Yeah.
I appreciate
someone,
that.
Yeah. Someone said recently, I can't remember what it was in reference to, but maybe it was somebody was talking about writing a book and they're like, oh, I don't know if I should do that. And I asked like, well, if it helps like just one person change their life, like, would that be worth it? It's like,
And that
Maybe,
was
yeah.
exactly the goal I had when I started the other channel, was just, if I can help one person with this, then it's probably worth it to at least try.
Right.
yeah.
So, yeah. So I guess circling back on
Are you trying to get the attention off you, Blake?
called out.
I had one thing I wanted to add before we jump in with a new topic, Blake, which is I feel like, and I'm curious if this is true for you, Blair, but I feel like me going to school to be a therapist is sort of that same version of like stepping out there and doing something for myself that is feeling like a decision that is going to help other people. It's scary. It's putting myself out there more. It's going to be, I've been doing a business with my wife for 12 years, and I've had that sort of disguise that we're a couple doing this together. But this is my first thing where I'm going out on my own and doing it for me. I'm wondering what that feels like for you, Blair. But like for me, that's been an act of like taking care of myself and sort of a nice version of sort of saying what I want and what I need in my life right now.
For sure. I think it's counteractive or counter to the like fear that I was talking about before. Like fear has driven me to stay in relationships longer than I wanted and the career that I thought I wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And so leaving any sort of career that I had before to pursue therapy is like a huge gamble on myself, for sure. I agree with that.
Yeah.
What did that journey look like for both of you, recognizing that that was something you needed for yourself? And maybe Jamie, I'll start with you since you brought it up.
Yeah. I think it goes into I think for a long time, Lauren and I had the discussion multiple times throughout our career where I was like, I want to step away from the wedding photography business, but it was going well. It was making us money. Lauren really appreciated me being in the business and relied on me in a lot of ways to operate the business, but I wasn't happy doing it. But I continued to do it in order to please Lauren. And I think that was a big part of it. And I don't want to put that on Lauren. Like I was like, she was forcing me to do this. Like I was doing that in the No More Mr. Nice Guy version of the world, where it was like, I was thinking I was doing the right thing by being good for her. Yeah. And so it was causing my own sort of version of suffering. So I think I went through these cycles of like depression around my career and would try and step out of it in some way, but it would just always ultimately fail. And so eventually it was just like, I think enough was enough. And I got to the point, I think having had a kid sort of helped me realize in some strange way, I don't know if I can put it into words, but having a kid helped me realize maybe a version of it is like, I want to be somebody that Avit can look up to and can see me thriving in my life rather than doing stuff just to please. And so it helped me sort of make that decision to say, okay, I'm finally going to go do this thing. And I think some version of like recognizing this is what I need, not what Lauren wants me to do. And so, yeah, it just took some time. And eventually I was just like, okay, I'm going to go do it.
Yeah. In the nice guy realm, like, because now you're saying you like recognize it was a need of yours. I'm curious if now you, like, in retrospect, a little bit looking at it, have you noticed Lauren recognizing you're pursuing your need and like a stronger bond over that? She's seeing that you're pursuing your needs and she's like, I really appreciate that and I love that.
Yeah, sort of. I think there's definitely some growing pains in the process of that decision. Part of the reality of making this decision is that it's blown up our lives a little bit. Like our career was together in this wedding photography business. Our wedding photography business is now taking a large hit as a result of me doing this. I'm going to school. We have a kid. We need to make money. And so Lauren's now having to take on a huge burden around our income. And I think that's putting a lot of pressure on her. I'm trying to do what I can as well, but it's hard when you're going to school and have lots of other responsibilities. So I think in some ways I've seen Lauren have that sort of attracted, like, oh, you're doing your own thing. That's really cool. She's proud of me doing this podcast. She's proud of me for going to school. And I feel that energy. And also we have all the other stuff going on. So it's, equal parts, yes, and equal parts. It's really,
it
really
can
challenging.
get complicated when it's intertwined with your income and all these other, your family and all these other factors. Yeah.
But I think those growing pains are worth it. And I think that the more I can see a version of the world where I'm off working as a therapist, Lauren's thriving with wedding photography, and she does, her own sort of coaching stuff. And I can see us thriving independently and really thriving in our relationship much more now that we're disconnected from this part of our relationship where I was built to sort of try to please her, and that being taken away I felt relief from that. So that's been great.
Yeah. The fact that you guys have been in like running a business together for 12 years is wild to me. With a partner, I can't imagine that in my life at all.
Yeah. I think it can work for a lot of people, but I think that the longer we've done it, the more I've realized it's just going to be really, really great when we don't have that amount of life integration together. And it'll be really healthy and good.
And I think it really kind of goes to show that like you actually get more of what you want when you're asking for what you want. Like it sounds so obvious, but for so many years you felt like, even though the wedding photography wasn't like your passion, what you really wanted to be doing, it still felt like the right thing to be doing. But ironically, it wasn't giving probably either of you the full amount of what you really needed. And even though now there's going to be some growing pains, like you said, the long-term benefit is going to be huge in that you're both thriving and doing the things that you want to be doing. And it just, that is the one of the hardest parts of this whole like discovery of what you need, is then saying like, oh, okay, do I need to maybe blow up a part of my life to do this? But I think in most cases, if it's something that you discover that you truly need, it probably is worth it. Because life's pretty short, and if you're spending it suffering through and powering through because you think it's what you're supposed to be doing, but not what you need to be doing, it's gonna be a hard one. So
for sure.
Yeah. The other thing I forgot to mention in this process is Lauren's dad passed away almost 2 years ago. And that was another sort of impetus for this change, is I think Lauren had a lot of realization and, obviously hard moments, but some moments of clarity around life path. And I was miserable I was unhappy doing wedding photography. I was absolutely miserable doing wedding video. And she was like, Jamie, you need to stop doing wedding video. Like, it was like very clear to her after her dad passed. She was like, it was sort of helpful, Blair, kind of like someone vocalizing your need for you.
Yeah.
She sort of said that out loud, and I was like, you're absolutely right. Like, I need to stop doing this. Like, this is so bad. And so that was a helpful part of the process. It was like, once she vocalized that, we made the decision to step away from that. It sort of started the snowball effect, I think, of this process happening. So grateful for that moment. But obviously it's funny having death in your life be an impetus for change, but it is something that forces you to think differently and look at your life and examine it.
They say, a change in environment is another kind of like catalyst for that too. Sometimes, like, because we get stuck in one, and this is one of the other topics I actually wanted to talk about. So it was good. Circle back to that we get stuck in our own patterns. And we just sort of train ourselves at like, well, this is a pattern to get what you may perceive as a reward, even if it's not really. But it's just something that you've always done. Sometimes we just subconsciously do things without thinking about them. And it's not until a big change in your life, change in your environment, that maybe recognizes, oh, I was stuck in this pattern for such a long time. And so sometimes that can help you recognize some of the things that you need or things that you want to change
Yeah.
in your life. I know, Blair, you've had some
Yeah,
similar experiences as well in that
for
regard.
sure. Yeah. Even, yeah, your mention of death being like a catalyst for change in your life. Like that's, that's exactly what mine was.
Yeah. Yeah.
It wasn't like when I was working in tech, I think it was more the grind of the actual like corporate world and like seeing, because at a startup level, it's everything's going really quickly and move. There's not a lot of like checks to get to make things happen. But as the company grew, it was like just everything became such a trudge, and the bad ideas were getting like brought to executive level reviews, and so I started to pull back. I could feel myself pulling back at that point from like, what is this? Like, what am I doing? Yeah. And then noticing all the different times that we had to go through layoffs. And I just felt like a cog that just kept getting spit out on things. So my mom getting sick and yeah, and getting let go at the same time. Like it was, to me, it felt like the universe was like, all right, dude,
Mm.
like, do the thing that like actually makes you feel good. And that even more so when I started interviewing for jobs. That's when I was like, oh
Yeah.
no, I'm not gonna be able to do this. So that was the catalyst for me. And I was like, I need to start pursuing the thing that I know will give me the thing that I didn't know that it would give me happiness, or more purpose. I didn't know for sure that I would feel that, but I definitely had the sense that this is something that I've thought about for a long time, and I know that I am good at asking questions and listening. And, so it was something that I was in the back of my mind, and so it felt like the universe was kind of just like, do it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's important to recognize, some part of this process of like establishing what you need and want in life. Like, I don't know if you guys believe this, but I believe in sort of some version of the universe is friendly and like wants to support you in pursuing your passions and trying to find what you want in life. And so I think that like listen to the signs that are pushing you forward towards something.
mhm.
Yeah.
Might be helpful.
Yeah.
What are your guys' thoughts on the whole concept he talks about of like there's a lot of disassociation and like addiction
Yeah.
that float around the nice guy syndrome. And this has been an issue for me for sure. This tendency to like the things that I find that I like default to or like have addictions to, I guess, are like somewhat dissociative in nature. Like video games is something I it is a need for me, but it also can be an addiction for me as
Mhm.
well.
Yeah.
Alcohol, not so much anymore, but at one point in my life, porn.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mhm.
and these are like things that are just a total distraction for the mind, like just a way of like getting out of my own life in a
Mm-hmm.
sense. Did you guys have any experiences like that too? Did you relate to that part of the book?
For
Definitely.
sure. Yeah. Blair, do you want to go first? Or you want me to go?
I'd like you to go.
um, I for sure. I mean, I think that porn for me is one example of that. Like, I think that at different times in my life, it's been more of a coping mechanism and addiction than it is now. But I mean, going into my story more specifically, this ties in with the dishonesty aspect of being a nice guy. For a long time in my relationship, I touched on this in my mental health journey, but a long time in my relationship, I was hiding the fact that I was watching porn because I thought that it was, it was all tied into shame, religious trauma,
You'd be an
growing
old
up.
gross man if you were.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Didn't want to be an old gross man. So
yeah.
I was hiding it from my wife, and it was very much sort of like that addictive behavior of like keeping it hidden so that I didn't have to give it up, and thinking that if I shared it, I would have to give it up. And,
Mm.
part of the process of maybe reading this book for the first time, I'm not exactly sure if it was tied into this process, but I ended up sharing it with Lauren that I was watching porn, sort of bringing it to light and giving it that space, and being able to have the conversations with Lauren. And obviously she was incredibly hurt that I was watching porn dishonestly more
Yeah.
than the fact that I was actually watching it. Like, I think she had grown up in the same culture as me, and we went to sex therapy afterwards, and we had lots of really good conversations and did lots of research. And so I think that once we educated ourselves more and talked about it more, it became more like, oh, porn isn't necessarily the evil thing. The evil thing is like the shame and how it was being used and hiding it and all of those things. So being able to have it more out in the open allowed me to sort of develop over time a relationship with it where I didn't feel that shame and didn't feel that sort of like hidden nature. And so as a result, it became less of a thing for me, less of an addiction, and more just like, oh, that's just, it's in my life, but it's not that big a deal. And I think the bigger you make something, the bigger it sort of becomes.
I feel like what we should tie into this is the aspects of nice guys that are not good. I feel like when people are like, well, what's wrong with being a nice guy?
Yeah,
like he addresses those in the book. Nice guys are dishonest, secretive, compartmentalized, manipulative, controlling, give to get, passive aggressive, full of rage, are addictive, have difficulty setting boundaries, frequently isolated, a bunch of different things. But yeah, I wanted to touch on that because I feel like people, they're like, oh, I'm a nice guy, and like what's wrong with being a nice guy? But it's like it's all these different things. The way that you're interacting with the world tends to bring in really negative aspects of yourself that are you don't necessarily want that to be the presentation of yourself that you're giving to the world.
Yeah, it's almost like the hidden, like when you feel the need to hide something,
Yeah,
it feels more like an addiction. I think it has a tendency to become an addiction too. And I can't quite put my finger on exactly why that is.
I think it's connected, probably because it's connected to the shame element.
Shame, yeah.
It's like you need to hide it because you feel ashamed of it. And I think that oftentimes when those two are connected, you end up doing it more in order to cope with the negative feelings associated. It's the shame cycle, sort of like to cope with it. So it's like, I think that if you're in that cycle, then it can be a bit of a problem. So I'm curious, Blair, if there's ever been behavior like that for you, where it's like you were doing something that was maybe hidden, not necessarily in an addictive way, where you were doing it so much that you felt like you couldn't stop, but like you were doing something that felt hidden as a result of trying to people please or hide a part of yourself because you felt ashamed.
Yeah, no, the one that comes to mind is sexting. It's something that I got into early on in my like sexual experience. I remember being caught doing that when I was like a kid in like chat rooms to age myself a little bit. But I mean, the book is pretty old too. It talks about like 900 numbers or something. I was like, I don't even know what that is. But no, sexting is peep shows. Yeah. Well, it probably still exists somewhere.
Yeah,
but
just the name is a little dated, I think. Anyway, go ahead.
No, but yeah, so sexting was the one that came to mind, Jamie, when you asked that question, where it was something I did with partners. But then when I was with other partners, it became something that I felt like I was hiding and couldn't stop doing. So addictive in nature. I've actually talked to therapists about this too. I'm like, it does feel like an addictive aspect of my personality, but yeah, that's something that's been addictive for me, and still trying to figure out what that is exactly, because sexting for me is like it's a way of connecting with someone. But yeah, it's definitely something that I've hid in relationships, but once it came to light, that's I think why it's difficult for me to answer this type of thing, because I definitely have a lot of the nice guy syndrome aspects of my personality, but I when something is brought to light, I tend to just keep it out in the light and like make sure that I'm not trying to hide it. I started telling partners about that. That's something that I have an interest in, and hopefully they're okay with that. Non-monogamy kind of blossomed out of that in a way. So there's a lot of different
I think that's a big part of like kind of overcoming the nice guy syndrome. Not like, I think it's a lifelong, growth journey, but there's so many things that like I kept hidden, and like things are just like why did I do that? And I mean, going back to the hair loss thing, like hiding how much that was like impacting me, and like that I got a hair transplant, and like that I was hiding that, and now just like being open about all that, it just feels so much better. Like it's amazing how much better you feel when it's just like when it's out in the open. And it's just that holding on to things and like keeping things hidden that puts you in that shame cycle, I guess, Jamie, that you were talking about. I think it's hard to do. Like, it's really hard to do. And I still find myself doing it with just stupid things. Like, why was I like hiding that thing? It's meaningless. There was no reason to hide it, but I was. And I think recognizing that you have that pattern and trying to like take steps to just get it out in the open is hugely helpful.
Yeah.
Getting it out.
I'll still find myself, like if Lauren's like out of the office, we have an office where our desks are next to each other. And sometimes when she's out of the office, I'll be like on a YouTube bender and then she comes back in the office and I'm like, oh shit. Like, I was like, realize what I was doing. And it's like, it's one of those, I think the same thing you felt with video games, Blake, where it's like I could totally do that in front of her if I wanted to. Like I wouldn't, it would be the same thing, but like I was doing it in that sort of shameful, like hidden way. And so then I started to feel guilty about it. So it's
you're
easy to catch
putting
yourself.
it on the other person that they're going to make you feel guilty or something.
Right.
Yeah.
Part of the covert contract or in a different way.
Right.
There was one other thing that I wanted to talk about. Oh, the one thing I wanted to mention, sort of like overarching with this book that feels like it's worth mentioning, is just that this book I feel like is a really good starting place for a lot of men. And I think it's a good umbrella sort of approach to recognizing a lot of this behavior. And as you start to become more self-aware, I think for a lot of people, it's good to recognize your areas of weaknesses and go into that more specifically. But I don't know that this book is going to be like the solve all for every man,
Right.
It gives you like that entry point into like discovering like, maybe there are some things that I need to address. But yeah, it doesn't go into like a ton of detail on each specific thing. So you might recognize a generic thing that you're like, yeah, I definitely do that, or I relate to that. And then you might need to explore those a little bit more deeply in other avenues. But it is a great entry point for someone who's just trying to figure out like what's going on with me. Like, I know something's off and I need to figure this out.
Yeah. It feels like it's a kind of a broad strokes type of book. And I think as I was reading some of the parts to my partner, she was like, oh, it sounds like I could fit into the nice guy syndrome in a lot of ways too.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's more of a people pleasing type mentality that I think that it's addressing. And if that's something that you deal with, this book will definitely help you to at least realize it and give you steps to kind of trying to counter those things, those intuitions or
and it does have a lot of like action steps to take at the end of each chapter. Like it'll cover a certain topic and then it will give you like some certain action items or exercises to try out to start overcoming some of this. So
I feel like there's so much in this too. Like there's so much in my story, and I'm sure in your guys' story, that where like this resonates, and I could go into like so many different aspects of like my relationship with Lauren or my relationship with my mom or my dad, where I feel like you could dig into this more. But I feel like one of the things that I wanted to also address is what manhood looks like to you guys, modern manhood, if we can get into that really fast. I know we're getting close on time, but from this book specifically, like what did you notice about manhood and what being a good man looks like to you?
Yeah, the part that because the way that the book kind of introduces things, it's like the nice guy and the bad parts of the nice guy, and then what the kind of the opposite of the nice guy looks like. And the author refers to it as like the integrated male. And he has like a strong sense of self, likes himself just as he is, takes responsibility for getting his own needs met, has integrity, comfortable in his masculinity and sexuality, all different things. But that's the integrated male. I really enjoyed his description of that as like the kind of kind of the pinnacle of a man's self-knowledge. But that's kind of how I think of it too. Like, not like getting away from the book specifically, but like someone who knows who they are and what they want. I think that's like the ultimate goal, honestly, in not only as a man, but just as a person on this floating rock in space.
Yeah, those are, I mean, those types of men are the men that I look up to the most. You know, it's like you see you have those out in the world, and so yeah, trying to become that for sure. I
Mhm.
think the part I related to the most is like having integrity. Like I feel like that's the part that feels like the word that can help me identify when I'm doing something that feels more in line with who I want to be. I feel like
Mm.
integrity is a good indicator.
Love that.
Yeah, I agree with everything you guys said. And one other thought that just occurred to me is like, yeah, when you look at the people that you do look up to or admire, what are those qualities? And yeah, it's somebody who's self-assured, knows what their goals are, knows how to set the boundaries to work towards those, does it confidently, humbly, but confidently. And those are the types of qualities that I think that certainly I strive to adapt more of. And I think he certainly talks about a lot of that in the book. I thought it was interesting too. He kind of brought up like there's some part of the what created the nice guy syndrome, in his opinion at least, was like there's some demonization of men in general,
Yeah.
Mm.
that started to happen.
It's probably even
and
more so the case now.
and yeah, and so for nice guys, they wanted to be like, no, I'm not that type of guy.
Right.
Like,
Hmm.
look how nice I am, look how agreeable I am, look how much I go out of my way to please you. I'm not the asshole that everybody's complaining about.
Yeah.
I'm different. And that has kind of swung things a little bit too far in some cases the other direction.
Hmm.
um, and kind of created kind of that more passive kind of man who is just more concerned about pleasing others than himself. And kind of tying back to what we talked about before, people tend to like you more are when you are confident in what you want and you're clear in your boundaries and what it is that you want.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
People tend to respect that more.
There's some takeaways from like seeing confident, outspoken men, and I think our world has swung now, unfortunately, in a direction where I think a lot of young men feel like underrepresented in
Yeah.
terms of like what that masculinity looks like, and so they look towards a lot of what they're seeing out in politics and in the world, and attaching to those men when we need to find that man who's confident in what who they are, but also knows how to be a man of integrity and be an example of how to be in the world. So
Yeah.
Hmm.
um, we need more of that in the world.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
agree.
absolutely. Well, that was probably a pretty good spot to wrap things up.
I
Yeah,
think so.
yeah. I think one thing I would want any listener to do if they're feeling like this resonates with them, it'd be cool to hear your story if you're open to sharing with us, or have some version of something that's hidden that you want to talk about. We'd be a safe space to talk to. So you could email us at hello@better-mental.com. It's a new
Nice. Love
email
that.
for us, or share with us on our YouTube channel or whatever.
We definitely want to continue to destigmatize men being more open about what it is they're going through. So with that, I think thanks everybody for listening, and we'll see you in the next one.
All right. See you guys.
Bye.